They said it wouldn't matter, I whispered to myself, staring at the faded patch. But when the general touched it, everything changed. I've lived in small towns my whole life, and everyone has that person. You know the type. The one who sits in the same spot every day, orders the same thing, never causes trouble. In Riverside, that person was Harold Mason. Every morning at 6:45 sharp, he'd push through the glass door of Annie's diner, the little bell announcing his arrival like clockwork. Here's what nobody understood about Harold. He wasn't just some lonely old man killing time. He was carrying something none of us could see. The first time I really noticed him, I was rushing through my morning routine, juggling my phone and a stack of Veterans Day event proposals. The whole town was buzzing about our upcoming ceremony, and as the new events coordinator, I was drowning in logistics. Coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, I burst through the diner door like I owned the place. "Triple shot, Annie," I called out, not bothering with pleasantries. "This Veterans Day thing is going to be the death of me." That's when I saw him. Corner booth, same as always. Wearing that jacket. God, that jacket looked like it had been through a war. Literally. Faded green canvas, frayed at the edges, with this weird triangular patch on the shoulder that was so worn you could barely make out the colors. Blue, maybe? Or gray? Hard to tell. "Still hogging the prime real estate, I see," I muttered, loud enough for him to hear. Annie shot me a look that could freeze coffee. "That man saved my grandson's life 3 years ago," she said quietly. "Tommy was chasing a ball into traffic. Harold moved faster than a man his age should be able to move." I blinked. "Oh, I didn't know that. Lot of things you don't know, honey." But here's the thing. I didn't really listen. Not then. I was too caught up in my own importance, too busy planning the perfect Veterans Day ceremony to notice the veteran sitting right in front of me. Looking back, that was my first mistake. The second mistake came 2 days later at Memorial Gardens. I'd arrived early to survey the setup area, measuring distances for the folding chairs and speaker system. The morning mist was still thick between the headstones, and the whole place felt like a movie set. Peaceful, almost sacred. That's when I spotted him again. Harold kneeling beside a weathered grave marker, gently cleaning the bronze nameplate with a soft cloth. He had a small American flag in his other hand, positioning it just so in the ground beside the headstone. "Sir," I called out, my voice echoing off the monuments, "this area is restricted until our setup crew finishes the layout." He turned slowly, those gray eyes taking me in with the patience of someone who'd heard louder voices than mine. He didn't argue, didn't complain, just nodded and gathered his cleaning supplies. "Insurance liability," I explained, holding up my clipboard like a shield, "can't have unauthorized personnel in the ceremony zone." He stood with obvious effort, his knees creaking audibly. That's when I noticed a small wooden sign he'd placed near the walkway. "Remember them," carved in careful block letters. "Did you make that?" I asked. Before he could answer, Maria Santos emerged from behind the maintenance shed. She'd been the cemetery caretaker for 15 years, and her look told me I'd stepped in something. "He makes one every year," she said firmly, "and I leave it exactly where he puts it." It's not city-approved signage," I stammered. Maria crossed her arms. "Then approve it?" Harold picked up his sign without a word and walked away, his jacket pulling tight across his shoulders as he moved. That triangular patch caught the morning light for just a second, long enough for me to wonder what unit it represented. But I didn't ask. Another mistake. The third and biggest mistake happened at the ceremony itself. November 11th arrived cold and crisp, with that sharp autumn air that makes your cheeks sting and your breath visible. Riverside's Veterans Day ceremony wasn't much. Maybe 100 people in folding chairs, a high school marching band, and a few local politicians giving speeches about sacrifice and service. I stood at the podium, sweating despite the cold, shuffling through my index cards. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "please welcome our keynote speaker, retired General Patricia Romano, decorated veteran of the 82nd Airborne and recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross." Polite applause rippled through the crowd as the general approached the platform. She was impressive. Crisp uniform, silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun, chest full of ribbons that spoke of battles I couldn't pronounce. But something stopped her mid-stride. She'd been scanning the crowd, probably looking for VIPs in the front row. Instead, her gaze locked onto something in the back. Her expression changed, not recognition exactly, but something deeper. Respect? Oh. Without a word, she stepped off the platform. The crowd murmured, confused. The band stumbled through their fanfare and went silent. I gripped the podium, wondering if I should say something, do something, anything. General Romano walked straight through the seated audience, her polished boots clicking on the pavement. She stopped in front of Harold Mason, who sat alone in the last row, hands folded over that battered jacket. Then she did something that made my blood freeze. She came to attention and saluted. Not a casual wave or a respectful nod. A full military salute, crisp and precise, held longer than protocol required. The kind of salute reserved for heroes. The crowd went dead silent. You could hear the flag snapping in the breeze overhead. That patch, the general said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air, was only awarded to 12 men. He's one of 3 still alive. My index cards slipped from my hands and scattered in the wind. Harold slowly stood and returned the salute with the same military precision. For a moment, these 2 soldiers, decades and ranks apart, connected across time and space, sharing something the rest of us could only witness from the outside. Operation Nightfall, the general continued, her voice thick with emotion. Classified for 30 years. Behind enemy lines, radio dead, pilot killed on impact. This man carried 3 wounded soldiers through 15 miles of hostile territory. Took him 4 days. Saved all 3 lives. The silence stretched until someone in the crowd started clapping. Then everyone joined in, not the polite applause of civic duty, but something raw and genuine. Harold sat down heavily, and I could see his hands shaking slightly. The general maintained her salute for another long moment, then returned to the platform. She never gave her prepared speech. Instead, she talked about quiet heroes and unsung service, about the men and women who did extraordinary things without seeking recognition. I spent the entire time staring at Harold's jacket, that faded triangular patch now glowing like a beacon in my mind. After the ceremony, I tried to find him. The crowd was dispersing, people heading to their bars or the community center for coffee and donuts. But Harold was gone, like morning mist. The next day, I went to the diner. His corner booth was empty for the first time in years. Annie looked worried. "He left this," she said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the counter. It was a note, written in the same careful handwriting I'd seen on his wooden sign. "Thank you for remembering us. The stories matter more than the teller." Underneath, he'd included an address. I found his house 20 minutes later, a small ranch on Elm Street with a tidy yard and drawn curtains. My knock echoed hollowly. No answer. Mrs. Chen from next door was watering her plants. "You looking for Harold?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm Derek from the city. I wanted to talk to him about—" "About yesterday?" She smiled knowingly. "That was something, wasn't it? 40 years I've been his neighbor. Never knew what he did but for there. Never asked. Is he okay?" "He's fine, just needed some quiet time. That kind of attention, it's hard for men like him." I left my business card in his mailbox with a note. "I'm sorry, I'd like to understand." He called 3 days later. "You want to understand?" His voice was rough with disuse. "Meet me at Memorial Gardens tomorrow. 3 o'clock. I arrived early, nervous as a teenager on a first date. Harold was already there, standing beside the same grave mark I'd seen him cleaning weeks ago. This time I read the inscription. Lieutenant Michael Donovan, 1952 to 1973, beloved son and soldier. He was my radio operator, Harold said without preamble. 21 years old. Had a picture of his girl back home that he'd show anyone who'd listen. Mary Beth from Kansas. They were going to get married when he got back. He knelt and placed a fresh flower beside the headstone. Mike took shrapnel in the chest during the extraction. Kept apologizing for slowing us down. Died in my arms 2 miles from the pickup point. The weight of those words settled between us like stones. I come here every week, Harold continued. Not for me, for him, for the others who didn't make it home. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? He looked at me with those gray eyes, and I saw something I'd missed before. Not emptiness, but fullness. Too much weight carried for too long. Who was I going to tell, and why? Mike didn't die so I could be famous. He died because his country asked him to serve, and he said yes. Same as me, same as thousands of others. I felt small standing there. Small and stupid and ashamed. The patch, I said quietly. What was Operation Nightfall? Harold was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, we weren't supposed to be there. Officially, we were never there. Deep reconnaissance, they called it. Intel gathering. But intel has a way of becoming extraction when things go sideways. He touched the worn fabric onto his shoulder. 12 men went in, 5 came back. This patch, it's not about being a hero. It's about remembering the 7 who didn't. The next week, I did something I'd never done before. I showed up at the diner at 6:45 a.m. and asked Annie if I could buy Harold breakfast. He was surprised to see me, but he nodded toward the empty side of his booth. I slid in, suddenly aware of how sacred this space felt. I've been thinking about what you said, I began. Have you? About remembering the ones who didn't come back. I think I've been doing Veterans Day all wrong. Harold stirred his coffee slowly. How so? We focus on the ceremony, the speeches, the recognition. But maybe the real remembering happens in the quiet moments, like what you do at the cemetery every week. He looked up from his cup. Maybe. Would you help me? Next year, I mean. Not as the guest of honor or anything like that. Just help me understand how to remember properly. For the first time since I'd known him, Harold smiled. A real smile, not just politeness. I think Mike would like that, he said. The following Veterans Day was different. Smaller ceremony, fewer speeches. Instead of focusing on celebration, we focused on remembrance. Harold didn't speak at the podium, but he led a quiet procession through Memorial Gardens, stopping at each grave to share a story or a moment of silence. General Romano came back as our guest. She brought something with her, a framed citation that had been classified for 30 years. Operation Nightfall was officially recognized, and the 5 survivors were finally acknowledged for their service. Harold accepted the recognition with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else. No grand speech, no emotional moment, just a simple thank you and a salute to his fallen brothers. Later, at the community center reception, a young veteran approached Harold, fresh back from Afghanistan, still wearing his dress blues. Sir, the young man said, I heard about what you did. I just wanted to say, it matters. What you did over there, what you do here, it matters. Harold clasped the young man's shoulder. Keep carrying it forward, son. That's all any of us can do. I watched this exchange from across the room, finally understanding what I'd been missing all along. Harold wasn't just some old man in a faded jacket. He was a living bridge between past and present, between those who served and those who remained. The jacket wasn't just clothing, it was a memorial he wore every day. That night, I went home and called my grandfather. He'd served in Korea but rarely talked about it. We spent 2 hours on the phone, and for the first time, he told me about his war. Some stories, I learned, are worth waiting for. The next morning, I showed up at the diner at 6:45. Harold was already in his booth, reading the paper. He looked up when I approached. This becoming a habit? He asked. I hope so, I replied. Annie brought me coffee without being asked. Harold folded his paper and we sat in comfortable silence. 2 men from different generations learning to understand each other. Outside the window, the town was waking up. Cars heading to work, kids walking to school, life moving forward the way it always does. But inside that corner booth, time moved differently, slower, more thoughtfully. Harold opened his paper again, and I caught sight of the headlines. Another conflict somewhere overseas, more young men and women putting on uniforms and saying yes to their country's call. Do you think it's worth it? I asked suddenly. All of it. The wars, the sacrifice, the cost. Harold was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. A young man in dress uniform, smiling at the camera. Lieutenant Michael Donovan. I don't know if it's worth it, Harold said, but I know it happened, and I know these men and women deserve better than being forgotten. He tucked the photo away. That's not about politics or policy. That's about human beings who made the ultimate sacrifice. They deserve to be remembered, not as symbols or statistics, but as people, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, friends and lovers. I nodded, understanding finally clicking into place. The jacket, I said, you wear it every day because Mike can't wear his anymore. Neither can the others. So I wear mine for all of us. 3 years have passed since that Veterans Day ceremony. Harold and I meet for breakfast twice a week now. Not to talk about the war, he shares those stories sparingly, and only when they serve a purpose. Mostly we just sit and watch the town wake up. He's taught me more about service and sacrifice in those quiet mornings than any book or documentary ever could. Service isn't just about the big moments, the dramatic rescues, the medals and ceremonies. It's about showing up, day after day, carrying the weight for those who can't carry it themselves. Last month, Harold had a mild heart attack. Nothing serious, but enough to scare all of us who care about him. When I visited him in the hospital, he was wearing a standard issue gown, but had insisted on keeping his jacket folded on the bedside table. Nurse tried to put it in the locker, he explained with a weak smile. Told her it goes where I go. The patch is looking pretty faded, I observed. Harold's eyes grew distant. Everything fades, Derek. That's why we have to keep telling the stories while we can. He's right, of course. The colors on that triangular patch are barely visible now, worn thin by decades of wear and weather. The jacket itself is held together more by will than by thread. But the stories? Those are as sharp and clear as ever. Harold returned to the diner a week after his hospital stay. Annie had saved his booth, of course. The regulars had taken turns keeping it occupied so no one else would claim it. When he walked through that door, the little bell chiming his arrival, the whole place went quiet for just a moment. Not out of awkwardness, but out of respect. Recognition. He nodded to the room, slid into his booth, and ordered his usual. Buttermilk pancakes, no butter, 2 strips of bacon. Left his $3 tip under the saucer before the food arrived. Some things never change, and sometimes that's exactly what we need. These days, Harold's story is known throughout Riverside. The high school kids sometimes stop by the diner just to catch a glimpse of him. A few have asked to hear about the war, and Harold obliges when the mood strikes him. But he always ends these conversations the same way. The real heroes didn't come home to tell their stories. I'm just the messenger. The jacket hangs in our local museum now, in a climate-controlled case with proper lighting. Harold donated it last month, saying it was time to let others carry the memory forward. But every morning at 6:45, he still walks through that diner door, still orders the same breakfast, still sits in the same booth. The only difference? Now he wears a simple black sweater instead of that faded military jacket. And sometimes, if you know what to look for, you can still see the outline where that triangular patch used to rest on his shoulder. A ghost of fabric, a shadow of service. Harold Mercer taught me that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's patient, sometimes it's just showing up, day after day, carrying the stories of those who can't tell them anymore. The jacket may be behind glass now, but the man wearing it, the man who chose to remember when others chose to forget, he's still here, still carrying the weight, still honoring the fallen in the simplest way possible, by remembering their names, by telling their stories, by making sure that as long as he draws breath, they're not forgotten. And maybe that's what real service looks like. Not the medals or the ceremonies or the recognition, just the quiet determination to honor those who came before and to pass their stories on to those who come after. One conversation at a time, one breakfast at a time, one faded patch at a time. Because in the end, we're all just messengers. And the message is simple. They mattered. They served. They're remembered. That's worth more than any medal. That's worth more than any speech. That's worth everything.